All right, let's get going. I'm still a little bit under the weather, so I'm not trying to I'm not trying to drop my voice and sound all cool. But it's just coming across like that. Let's get going. We have 4.1 lymphatics. Again, apologies for the delay here. So, introduction to the lymphatics. This is a secondary circulatory system that's complementing your blood vascular system. All right, so a secondary set of tubes, but with a different purpose, right? We already have something taking care of nutrient delivery and oxygen delivery. What's the point of this tubage? Well, it's going to return interstitial fluid to circulation, transporting lipids, which is a huge function here, and a network for immune surveillance. So not only do we have this set of tubage, but we have filters along the way to check for pathogens and any, unwanted debris. So because of this, there's a one-way flow going on here. These tubes begin blindly at the capillary bed. So they start as lymphatic capillaries and then work their way up to vessels, trunks, and ducts. Again, passing through lymph nodes for filtration. All right, so here's a rough representation of that immune system, of that lymphatic system, transporting all of that lymph eventually to their terminal destinations at the venous angles. And we'll talk about that momentarily. All right, again, the lymphatic capillaries are just these blind-ended sacs scattered throughout the connective tissue. Just, think of them as shower drains, basically, collecting that extra interstitial fluid that seeped out whenever hydrostatic pressure and oncotic pressure were kind of battling against each other. They have these one-way valves similar to veins. There's a picture on a coming slide that shows that, but that allows for this one-way flow to be maintained. And we're going to find this lymphatic stuff, or these lymphatic vessels, in basically all vascularized tissue, except for, avascular tissue. That's kind of funny. So like cartilage. Bone marrow, we're not going to have it. Now we have a lot of lymphatic progenitors there, so hopefully we have coverage. And the central nervous system has its own, what we call the G lymphatic system or the glymphatic system. And that's honestly still under heavy research to this day. But it doesn't have lymphatics in the way we're talking about it today. All right, and then after these capillaries conjoin, we'll call those lymphatic vessels. And same deal here. I'm just stressing that it's very similar to veins, very, very thin-walled with a bunch of valves. And we have this unidirectional flow that's very much so aided by the skeletal muscle pump. And what do I mean by that? Well, without getting too anatomy on you, let's say you have antagonizing muscle groups. So antagonist, right? That's the opposite force of the protagonist. All right. So think you have your quads on the front, and then you would have your hammies on the back. Sandwiched in between your quads and your hammies are your deep veins. And that's like that for every opposing muscle group. It's like that for the bis and tris. It's like that for your soleus, your gastroc, and all of those deep muscles of the leg. So basically, if you are just walking, if you're doing basic movements, you're flexing and extending. Even if it's, you don't have to be pumping iron. You are flexing and extending just by walking, just by moving your arms. All right, so that effectively massages those deep veins, which assists blood return to the heart. And right, the venous system needs that because, right, the arterial side of things had the ejection force of the heart to get things to where they need to go. The venous system, that ejection happened a while ago, so that's under much less pressure. So that assistance is great for blood return to the heart. Same deal here. Now, the veins are still technically connected to the cardiovasculature, still connected to that pump system. The lymphatics are not at all. All right, so we really, rely on movement and that like massaging of the anatomy basically to get this lymph back to where it needs to go. Um, so yeah, so make sure you're getting up and moving. It helps blood flow and it helps lymph flow. And just a cool little etymology for you. Lympha is from an ancient Greek god of fresh water. So yeah, we're purifying the elixir that flows within us. Creative stuff there. All right. If any of this stuff that I said confused you now, this diagram should hopefully dispel any of that. So blood leaves the heart through the aorta, comes down, and eventually when I get to the tissue level, I'm at a capillary bed, which is this finger-like net of very, very, very small vessels. And at this level, we deliver nutrients, we deliver oxygen, and then all of that denutriated and deoxygenated blood will enter the venous system to make its way back to the heart. During this, not all of the fluid is transferred properly, or I guess not improperly, but it's just not 100% is not transferred. We leave a little bit in the interstitial space. And that extra fluid gets drained and then filtered through the lymph node, which we'll talk about momentarily. But in these vessels, we have these valves. Okay? And that's what they look like here. So the pressure will shoot these valves open. But then, if anything tries to peel back, well, it's going to pool right here and pool right here. And then that is going to effectively close those valves. So that's how that unidirectional valve system works. All right, a big concept here that I wanted to get across is Starling's law. Now, I must impress upon you guys that I am oversimplifying this heavily. There's a whole equation that goes into this that talks about, the let me use a red. So this is a fancy blood vessel. Oh, that's terrible. Here we go. In the blood vessel, you have your blood pressure, right? The force of the fluid pushing on the vessel wall. Then on the outside of the fluid, outside of the vessel, you have dissolved particles trying to get in. That's like your water, your ions, your acid-base balance, that kind of stuff. If you want to know why that happens, take biochemistry. I lack the gift to explain that to you, but we call that oncotic pressure. Oncotic pressure. So that's where things like albumin come really, really in handy. We have a really distinct dissolved particle profile within our fluids, and that really does determine a lot of chemical gradients. So the battle between these two forces is kind of expressed in this equation that I'm not giving you. The main takeaway here, though, is that this battle causes capillary exchange to not be 100%. What do I mean by that? Well, it's usually 85-90. So here's a fancy capillary bed. All right. On the arterial end, 100% of that fluid is making its way into the tissue bed. That has the oxygen. That has the nutrients. We need all this to go. So it loses its nutrients, it loses its oxygen, it delivers it to the tissue. But then only 85% of that fluid is actually making it back into venous return. Where is that other 15% going? That is where I get my lymph. My lymphatic system is going to take on that extra interstitial fluid and drain it. All right, think about it as a shower drain. Taking all that extra fluid and going and checking it for pathogens. So that's the idea. It's oversimplified, but you should definitely understand what I'm trying to get across with Starling's law there. Another really cool linkage into into lymphatics. Okay, pause. Into immuno and anatomy, the namesake of this course, is gut lymphatics. So stuffed in the villi of intestines are lymphatic projections called lacteals. All right, and this is what it looks like here. So remember, in your intestine, you have all these large finger-like projections shooting out into the lumen. This increases surface area, which is highly beneficial for nutrient absorption. But within those villi, not only do I have my artery and my vein, I have a big lymphatic projection shooting up into that lacteal. And what this does is it allows for good lymphatic absorption within that villus. But why would I want that? Well, broken down fats are too large to be absorbed in the blood. So what the body does is it assembles them into something called chylomicrons, which are basically just little fatty sunflowers, just little fatty goblets. Okay? And that just gets absorbed into the lymphatic vessels. Those are a bit wider in diameter and can handle the larger chylomicron molecule. Okay? I don't know why that's how it happens, but that's just what it does. Okay, so these are absorbed into lacteals. Because of this, the lymph here is called chyle. We give it a different name because it looks very different, right? This lymph is high in fat content, so it looks very opaque and milky. That's why we call these lacteals. Lact, think lactose, that milk prefix. Alrighty, so that's a real cool tie-in to your anatomy there. The lymphatics are different in the gut and produce a different kind of lymph. It's really the same, it just looks a little different. Okay, bear with me for 1 second. My iPad's going to die. Let me get the charger. All right, super professional. Let's keep it going. So lymph nodes, we got to get this anatomy of these filters down because this is very important. So we have small bean-shaped organs scattered along these lymphatic vessels, and they're really clustered at the vertices of the body. So the big angles of the body, like my elbow, my armpit, my neck, my hip, we call that the inguinal region, my knee, so on and so forth. They have this dense capsule that surrounds them, trabeculae that extend inward, and their function, I've already said it a bunch of times, they're filters. They're going to check this lymph for anything that we don't want inside. All right, so trapping antigens and thusly initiating an immune response. In terms of things that are entering and leaving, right, the afferent lymphatic vessels are going to enter and deliver the lymph. The efferent lymphatics will be exiting at the hilum. So A for arrive, E for exit. And then separately from this lymph system, oh my gosh, excuse me, we have these high endothelial venules. All right, so this is more, this is part of the cardiovascular system. These are specialized venules that dump into the paracortex of the lymph node. We'll define that momentarily. And this is the main entry point for naive lymphocytes. So I want you to think back to Unit 2 and those developing B cells in the bone marrow. And eventually, once they figure their stuff out, will they go into circulation and they take hold in your secondary lymphatics. All right? One of these destinations is the lymph node. Okay? So that's 90% of those of how lymphocytes get to the lymph nodes is through these high endothelial venules. So a very important, back door, I guess, for lymphatic entry. All right. So I'll go through the text here, and then we'll hit it on the diagram. So the cortex is that outer region with big follicles that are basically just B cell hangouts. We have primary follicles that are full of naive B cells just, hanging out. And then secondary follicles are more so activated centers where germinal centers start to form. So these are those active proliferating B cells. If you remember the Thunderdome that I mentioned a couple units ago, this is where that somatic hypermutation and class switching is occurring. So this is where all that magic is happening. Either in the lymph node, you can also form germinal centers in your spleen and in the different malt patches that we talked about. Then we have your paracortex, and this is a more T-cell rich zone. A lot of antigen presentation by dendritic cells, and also remember your B cells are really good at antigen presentation as well, so that can happen here as well. And this is where those high endothelial venules come through. And then the medulla of the lymph node, so you have the cords and the sinuses. The cords just are the extensions, I guess, and the sinus is the pit that eventually leads into the efferent drainage. We have a lot of plasma cells here, so after differentiation has occurred, right, we ultimately end up as a plasma cell or a memory B cell. And some macrophages to just further clean things up. So yes, the sinus is the ultimate drainage point. That's where I'm sorry, you have sinuses kind of like all throughout the lymph node. So in the cortex, the sinus is just referring to the space. So the cortical sinuses is where all that afferent lymph is flowing. Then it percolates through the different structures of the cortex and paracortex and medulla. And then we get down to the medullary sinus or space, where all of that now checked fluid ultimately collects. So let's look at it on the diagram here. Let's check it out. So all of these here, those are all afferent lymphatics. So A for arrive, they're arriving at the lymph node, delivering all that good lymph to the lymph node for it to get checked. The teal on the outside here, all this teal, that is that dense fibrous capsule protecting the lymph node. And then in the orange, that is the cortex. That is the cortex. These little lines in here, those are the trabeculae shooting down. Oh my gosh, excuse me, guys. And then we have the follicles that are present within each sectioned out area that the trabeculae make. Okay. And sometimes we can have multiple follicles within one section. It's not a one-to-one per se. Then in the middle, I have represented here is just a primary follicle in which no activation has really happened yet. So these look a little boring, like nothing's really happening. There's no big activation. In a secondary follicle, let's say we'll go here. This gets messy, right? We start replicating like crazy. We start seeing multiple colors. Probably not green and red, but you know what I mean. The cells are activated, and if I have activated a B cell, well, that means clonal expansion is happening. That means I'm making a bunch of that cell. So we get a lot of action here. And remember, the germinal center, the Thunderdome, that light and dark zone where these antibodies are doing like that handshake test that we were talking about. Can I make this antibody better? Can I increase the affinity that it has for the target antigen? Can I mature the affinity? Can I cause affinity maturation? That's the whole point of that activated germinal center. Then in the blue here is the paracortex. Paracortex in blue. And then I've added in some super detailed high endothelial venules. Okay, so that is that backdoor entry point where 90% of your lymphocytes find their way to the lymph nodes for hanging out. Okay. Then you have your medullary area here. I'd say the red is the cords, like right here, right here, right here. And then the green is just the sinus. I'm less concerned here. This is basically just everything's already happened, right? So now we're just getting ready to leave. So things are more so differentiated down here, and we can get prepared to exit the lymph node and continue on. Remember E for exit. So this is efferent lymphatics, or efferent lymphatic vessel. So that's the whole deal there. We arrive through afferent, pass through the capsule, enter the cortex. In the cortex, we have a bunch of lymphoid follicles. Depending on their level of activation or not, they can be primary or secondary. A secondary follicle is going to have a big old activated germinal center with the thunderdome, the light and dark zones for somatic hypermutation, for class switching, all that good stuff. The blue region, more so composed of T cells, the paracortex, and this is where those high endothelial venules enter the lymph node. Then you have your medullary cords and the medullary sinus. All right. And finally, to cap things off, lymphatic drainage. We're going to talk about that all on 4.2, but just to give you a 30,000 foot view. Let's go bigger. There we go. Cool. Everything in this box here has the same ultimate drainage. And that is right here. Right there. So everything on the left of my head, my left arm, left pec. Honestly, it's all of the abdomen, so this isn't perfect. Abdomen, leg, ultimate drainage is this region right here. So this is the junction let's do that. This is the junction of the left internal jugular vein and the left subclavian vein. Where those two veins meet, we call that the venous angle. And this is where, oh my gosh, this is where this tube right here joins in with the veins. And we call that tube the thoracic duct. So that means 75% of the body's lymph drains into the venous angle via that tube, via the thoracic duct, which is kind of crazy. So that's responsible for all of the lymph that you got from digestion, from those lacteals, right? And all the lymph that's from like both your pinky toes, right? So that's a lot of traveling that has to occur there. Whereas for this portion here, it only has to worry about right arm, right pec, right face. But same deal, it does drain into this venous angle here. So the right internal jugular vein and the right subclavian. This one does not have a fancy name. It is simply called the right lymphatic duct. So the ultimate drainage of the whole body, like both of them are ultimately getting to the venous angles. It just depends on which one. Most of the time, it's the left venous angle where the thoracic duct joins. Much less of the time, it's the right lymphatic duct or the right where the right venous angle meets up. And yes, I already mentioned if there's an angle in the body, there's likely a collection of nodes there. And then also a really good term to know, I kind of blocked it out with this diagram here. I'll show you just a sec. So the cisterna chyli is the central collective pit of gut and lower limb lymphatics. Okay, this is a good term to know because it's really where a lot of your gut lymphatics ultimately drain to, and it's one of the structures that's visible like in dissection. Whereas your lymph nodes, you can find them in dissection, of course, but I don't know. At least in my experience, they have not been as prominent as other anatomical structures. This, however, is this big pit right here. Oh, that's not right. There we go. So that's that central drainage pit of all of those gut lymphatics and ultimately your leg lymphatics as well. Right, and then that feeds directly into this thoracic duct that runs all the way up and then drains into the left venous angle. All right, so that is the intro to lymphatics, just understanding this secondary circulatory-ish system that we have. That's main purpose is to collect extra interstitial fluid and to check it for pathogens. Ultimately, filtering it along the way through those lymph nodes that we discussed. So that's everything for 4.1. Again, apologies for the delay. Thank you guys for your patience, and have a wonderful day.